Hi, this section is on power supply problems, replacing power supplies, how we test power supplies, basically what happens when everything isn't going great. So that's what we're going to talk about now when it comes to power supplies. The first thing is the need to replace them. We don't always have to replace a power supply because it's died. Oftentimes, and this has happened to me on a personal level at my home PC, it's necessary sometimes when we add new devices. When we talked about calculating that wattage, you can see how adding something could require us to get a whole new power supply rather quickly. But sometimes a power supply as it gets older may not completely fail, but all of a sudden it's not putting out the rated wattage. And I had an issue on my personal computer where one of my hard drives would just be gone, and then it's back. And it's gone, and it's back. I actually thought it was the hard drive. I sent the hard drive back to Samsung, and they sent it back to me saying there's nothing wrong with this hard drive. And so I tried a new power supply, and my hard drive problems went away. So sometimes it's necessary when we add new devices. Sometimes it's just because it's old, even though it may still pass. And we have to make sure that we're using that wattage calculator to look and see if one of those is the issues on why we might need to upgrade or change out our power supply. Now, at this point in the class, we've had a chance to test using one of the two power supply testers, and we have other options as well as far as testing. Very basic one that just has green lights if the power's on. This one's a much more advanced, better power supply tester that tells us a lot more about frequencies as well. And I will tell you, in the case of that one, it passed with this one, failed with this one. So it wasn't getting all the frequencies that it needed. So power supply testers, by the way, are inexpensive. They're not a bad thing to have in your IT tool bag, but not everyone wants to spend $20, $25 on a tester. But it's better than spending $100 on a power supply that you didn't need. Because they may not be the issue. So the first thing is thinking about upgrading our power supply. If we're at really close to that wattage area, or if things just start acting quirky and going away and coming back, it could be because we're right at the edge of being able to put out enough power that we need to for our PC. So when we talk about actual power supply failures or power supply problems, they kind of fall in a couple categories. So first of all, is your PC booting at all? If you're pushing the power button and you get no response, it could be that the power supply has completely failed, and that happens. Usually we get some other indications first. The first indication usually of a power supply failing on ones I've had is a lack of airflow in the back. So if all of a sudden I look in there and I don't see the fan running, or I put my hand over it and don't feel warm air being blown across my fingers, it's gonna feel warm, but do I feel it being blown across my fingers and I know that fan is working, that can be one of the first things that takes out a power supply. Because even if a power supply is perfectly good, but it overheats, that overheat can cause that power supply to shut down, so your PC could be running for a while and then just turn off because it's all of a sudden overheated. So the first thing is, does it boot at all? We need to look for some error messages. Some power supplies actually have self-testing lights on the back of them where it has a little test button you push and the light turns green. It means it's a good power supply. Those are pretty reliable. When the light doesn't come on, the power supply is not good. And it says down there, look for error messages. There's not a lot of power supply error messages out there, but eliminate the unnecessary. And I would say use safe mode or rescue disk. No, I think unnecessary means you unplug those things on the inside that you don't need to test your machine. Do I need to have my CD-ROM plugged in? Maybe not. Do I need to have that extra data drive plugged in? Do I need to have all those extra USBs maybe that are plugged into the outside of my computer, like this camera, my Mimeo, the smart board, the microphone? I have so many USBs on my PC. Do I need those plugged in to test it? If I unplug those things and then all of a sudden the computer turns on, there's a good chance that it's just underpowering that system, and it indicates I immediately need to put in a new power supply in order to get it up to snuff. Now this is a power supply troubleshooting chart, and we have charts that we're going to go through in chapter 16 as we learn more and more about troubleshooting, but this is the one specifically about the PC. So it's not a great one because most power supply flow charts have triangles when you ask questions, and they have kind of bullet points when you're going to do things. This one isn't an ideal flow chart, but we'll look through it. So it says, does the PC boot correctly? Yes. Troubleshoot the system that is not working. In other words, it's not power supply, it's something else. No. Oh, okay. Well, is the screen blank? No. Is there an error message on the screen? Yes. Respond to the error message. No. Eliminate the unnecessary and try to perform a clean boot to the system. So that's what I'm talking about. And we talk about it later, called the divide and conquer rule, to remove those things that we don't need to try to conquer or get the PC going. So, is the screen blank? Yes. Can you hear the drive or the fan spinning or see lights? If I'm having problems with the computer, oftentimes I'll take off the one side so that I can look in and see what's happening when I push the power button. No. Start troubleshooting the power system, i.e. do a power supply check. If the power supply tests good, we've already learned in class from our own experience that if I don't have the front jumper set correctly, it doesn't matter if the power supply is good because it's not getting a signal to turn on. So those are things that we can look when we're looking specifically at the power system. Can you hear a single beep during boot? Yes. Start troubleshooting the video. Maybe. No. Start troubleshooting the motherboard. Basically, if we've got a clean power signal and we've got the jumper set correctly, and I, as I said, it could be the button. I've had buttons go out before where I had to take a small screwdriver and just close that connection between those two pins to get it to boot, and then all of a sudden it booted, and I knew it was the actual button itself going to the power supply jumper on the motherboard. So those are just some basic kind of, they're starting to learn about troubleshooting. Power system, okay, Odors Connections. If you smell something that smells like burning electrical, unplug your computer. There are very few things that are going to cause burning electrical other than the power supply itself. If you smell that, don't stick your head up into it. I think I already told you that story from when I flew Pavlo helicopters about the engineer doing that and passing out. Electrical smoke is not good for you. So don't try to ascertain it. Don't stick your head in the back of the PC and take a big whiff. If you think you smell burning wiring, if you think you are reasonably sure that you get an odor, then unplug your computer. Assume it's your power supply. Get a good check on it with it. Hold out and in a ventilation, well-ventilated area, because if it starts putting out smoke, you don't want to have anything happen. Check for loose cables. We have heard what the fan sounds like when it whacks up against the wires. That can happen. I've had fans actually cut the wires to certain things on a computer. That can happen. So then it says look at your switches on your monitor, your computer, your surge protector, your UPS, the circuit breaker, the wall outlet. You would not believe how many times I have fixed computers when all it was it was unplugged, or the power strip was off, or in the case it just happened 2 weeks ago with this circuit breaker popping. I normally say try switching the power cords with the monitor. Does the monitor light come on? If the monitor light comes on, even if there's nothing on it, you know there's power to the cord and there's power to the outlet. If the monitor light doesn't come on, then where's the power off at? Is the power off at the power strip? Is the power off at the breaker? And then the last thing on there, if the fan is not turning, turn the computer off. I'm not sure if it would be on. Turn the computer off, open it up, and check any connections to the power supply. Make sure they're good. But look in there. You know, this is an inexpensive fan to you can't see that. This is an inexpensive fan to replace inside a power supply. However, I don't suggest it because the capacitors in here are fairly large and you could get injured doing it. Power supplies aren't more than $30 to $50. And if it's an old power supply anyways, it may be well worth just replacing that as opposed to trying to get an old power supply to work even better. We've talked about that jumper, the power switch. It usually says power SW on there, and making sure that jumper is connected correctly. And like I said, once you know where the jumper goes, you can actually take a small screwdriver, if that was the power jumper, and just touch it against those two wires at the same time, and it would start that PC. It's not a maintained connection. It's a make the connection and it starts up the computer pretty quickly. As far as a non-functioning fan, is it a symptom of another problem? Almost definitely. If I plug in this to do a power test and I don't see the fan, this power supply, in my opinion, is done. I'm not going to try to recover it. I'm not going to try to, it's going to recycling. Could you open this up and replace this fan? Yes. Should you? In my opinion, no, because there's probably something else going on that caused that fan to go out as well. So I don't replace fans, but it is, test question, it is the first indication of a failing power supply, fan going out. And they'll cause the system to overheat because, as we already said, cooling the system is one of those purposes of the power supply. It doesn't just supply power, it also supplies much of the cooling air in this system. All the air in the system gets pulled in through the, I'm holding it up so you can't see it again, through the fan in the back and blown out through the back of the PC. And so it does definitely supply cooling, and those going out, in some cases, that's the only fan that's in the entire PC, would cause the PC to overheat and shut down. So, overheating caused the computer to hang while running. We know, because we talked about this in Chapter 1, and we'll learn more in Chapter 4 about it, but we know that CPUs cool themselves or slow themselves down if they start to overheat. So if all of a sudden your computer's hanging, it seems really, really slow, it's totally possible that it's overheating. It's trying to cool itself. And that's why it says check the airflow in the case, make sure it's not all clogged up. You can use a vacuum cleaner to vacuum off the front and the back of the case and the vent port covers to make sure that it's getting cool. Check the vents. And you can go into BIOS. This is use CMOS. Use BIOS. Many BIOSes will tell you what the internal temperature of the computer is, so you can use BIOS to check that as well for overheating. And if it's overheating, the last thing you can do is try adding extra cooling fans. If this thing is turning and it's working, but it still seems like it's running slow, cooling fans are cheap. They're between $1 and $5 a fan, depending on the size and if you want LED lights and all that kind of stuff. Usually I buy them in 4-packs or 5-packs, and they cost like $10. They're not really expensive, but putting in a well-functioning cooling fan can really help your system run a lot better. And we already talked a little bit about airflow, making sure you have good airflow across your motherboard and CPU and out of the case should be the best cooling flow in from the front, out through the back, unless your power supply's in the front, which I've never seen before. And pretty much that's it as far as what we can do about overheating. I have a computer that can take as many as 5 case fans. It can have 2 on the top, 2 in the front, and 1 in the back on top of the power supply. So look at your case in general to see if you can add additional fans, and you need to really make sure you know which size of fan, because the screw holes have to line up just like the form factor of other things. There's a myriad of sizes of fans that you can get. Most of them anymore are the 120 millimeter fan. That is it for basic power problems and how we deal with them. You all already know how to remove and replace a power supply. I've done it several times in the class. As far as making sure, the big gotchas is I like to look before I remove a power supply to make sure that the one I'm going to put in has all the connections that I need, making sure I always get the P1 on the motherboard and that P4 extra power for the CPU on the motherboard as well, and then making sure I get all my extra components plugged in, because if any of those things aren't plugged in, they're not going to work. And that's it for problem solving on the power supply.